Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. The United States carried out air and missile strikes inside Nigeria on Christmas Day, targeting alleged Islamic State-linked militants in the country's northwest in operations coordinated with Nigerian leadership. Now, the timing and justification of the strikes, framed by President Trump around the protection of Christians, have raised questions about motives, evidence, and consequences in Africa's most populous country. To discuss it all further, we're joined now by Scott Lucas, Professor of American Studies, University College Dublin. Good to have you back on TVP World.
Thank you so much, Sascha. Great to be here.
So with these strikes, how confident are we that they've struck their intended targets? I mean, this is in the northwest of the country. What do we know from the latest on the ground here?
Well, as you note, Sascha, it's important to cut through the rhetoric here. So let's start with the general rhetoric that this was to protect Christians. The attack in Sokoto, a region in northwest Sokoto, a region in northwest Nigeria, that is a largely Muslim population. Nigeria as a whole is split, about 50% Muslims, 45% Christians. But local bandits and indeed Islamist groups have attacked both Christians and Muslims. So this is not a one-sided thing. It's certainly not a genocide on Christians. In terms of the specifics of the attack, this is even more, I think, confusing when you match it against the rhetoric. Sokoto does not have prominent Islamic State factions. They're located on the other side of the country in the northeast. Boko Haram, one of the most violent and probably best known factions, is in the northeast. In the northwest, the prominent faction is called the Lakawara, a local faction that fought other bandit groups to get ascendancy and then has turned against the population. Residents in the region say they don't know of any casualties that were taking place and they don't know of any significant damage. So the U.S. military's claim that it destroyed 2 terrorist camps has not been established either. At this point, it looks like these were demonstration strikes with up to 16 Tomahawk cruise missiles. And they were largely demonstration strikes because there have been certain groups in the United States, certain legislators, and certain Christian groups who have been pressing Trump to take action.
Yeah, exactly. That was my next question. You said, let's talk about the rhetoric here. I mean, President Trump said this was because he said he's protecting Christians. There's been a massacre of Christians, or let's say they've been targeted in the last years there. So with that, was this only because of the pressure of domestic politics? Was this another sign? Is this a sign to come for more? As if we look at Pete Hegseth's comments, says more will come. So how do we interpret also the next step?
Well, I think certainly from the timing of the operation, domestic politics plays a great deal of this. I think the whole Trump administration's presentation of what is now being called Christian nationalism, some would say a white nationalism, has something to do with it. I think the timing of the fact that Trump, of course, is in trouble over other issues such as the Epstein files, he would like to divert from that pressure. But I think also we do need to say that there is a general issue that needs to be dealt with in Nigeria. And the Nigerian government has expressed support for these strikes without using the religious rhetoric. And that is, you have a series of Islamist groups and a series of bandit groups who have been attacking the population, Muslims and Christians alike. What do you do about that? Will the United States go in with a sustained campaign for military reasons to go in and to try to wage war on these groups? But the problem here is, if you attack Boko Haram, if you attack the Islamic State, even if you attack local groups like Lakawara, do you just simply make the problem worse? Do you simply cause further tension and division in the country, as we have seen happen in other African countries where the U.S. has intervened in recent years, such as Somalia?
Mm-hmm. And let's also talk about, you mentioned Boko Haram there. I mean, this is one of those infamous groups that has committed terrible atrocities as well, but in a different part of the country. There's several groups that are located across Nigeria. You said earlier this is a demonstration attack. So I'm just curious, with the words of the Secretary of War, with Trump's own rhetoric, where does this all lead? I mean, also the timing of this. Why now? Why on Christmas Day? I mean, in his Truth Social post, Trump said that, well, this is a quote-unquote Christmas gift. I mean, that's a bit low. But why now the timing? Was there a threat? Is the evidence there to support that? Why now?
There is no reason on the ground for this attack to have occurred. There was no imminent threat. Certainly the Lackawanna have been an ongoing threat to the population, but it wasn't as if their activities had escalated in recent days. No, let's be very clear. I mean, sometimes it's quite blatant. You know, you don't need to dig for it. On Christmas Day, as an administration posing as Christian nationalist, with certain so-called Christian groups pressing them to take action, and also with a president who's very hostile to Africa, is very hostile to Africa on racial grounds, who has gone so far as to block any refugees from Africa except for white South African farmers. This was an easy headline. Now, how long will he want to maintain that headline? Or how long will it be until he shifts to another area to grab a headline? Remember, such as an attack on Venezuela, such as an attack on another country, even as he tries to declare that he's a president of peace.
It's also interesting, some will look at this, and if we look at America's role in Africa, I mean, if we look also at a region quite close by, the Sahel, the whole stretch across Central Africa, I mean, we've seen rising militancy there as well, but Europeans have been pulled out, Americans also very much pulled out. Does this signal in your mind a return to this region on a wider front, or is this just a one-off?
We don't know, Sascha, because if I was to analyze it, you know, in traditional ways, and I'd look at military planning, I'd look at diplomatic planning, I'd look at economic planning, and I'd say, okay, where are we with this administration? Are they actually, as you mentioned, even as European countries have noted the problems of being in the Sahel at a time when they're under great pressure from local groups, local militaries, and Islamist factions? Would the U.S. dare to go back in there? Would it risk the quagmire that it has faced in other countries when it has done so? But I can't approach this as a standard analyst because this is not a coherent administration. Donald Trump does stuff just because he wants to appear tough. Pete Hegseth does stuff just because he wants to appear tough. The administration does stuff just because they're appealing for a particular headline on their right-wing outlets. So I cannot tell you if there will be any coordination of the effort in subsequent days. My suspicion at this point is, Sascha, this will recede. I think this may well be a one-off attack. I would actually look if there's going to be action of a sustained type, because there's more motive here. I'd look for regime change in Venezuela to be the story of 2026.
Okay. But I mean, in terms of this strike as well, I mean, it has also, let's say, locals a little bit confused. Some support it, some are against it. If we look at the makeup, as you said, of the country of Nigeria, roughly about 50-50 split between Christians and Muslims. But those patterns of attacks and violence are all across the country. So I'm just curious what this means in terms of strategy. I mean, ultimately, is this kind of strike effective in your mind? Is there something else behind it? Will this embolden more attacks? Where are we with the effectiveness of such an airstrike?
Well, I mean, let's take it from the local perspective, which is the most important, and that is that no, there's no immediate effectiveness of the strikes because we don't know of any significant casualties or any significant disruption to the Lackawanna. Now, if you were talking about a coordinated attempt between the Nigerian government, Nigerian groups, and U.S. groups to try to deal with the threat of violence from whichever group it takes from, okay, let's see that be rolled out on a coherent fashion. And certainly that's what the Nigerian government, how they're posing this morning. But if you present this as being a one-sided intervention to protect Christians, rather than protecting all Nigerians, you will increase division in that country. You will increase the risk that violence will become sectarian. And it is very striking right now that while the government is welcoming the American strikes and saying we will have a further campaign, that opposition groups, both Muslim groups, leading clerics, and opposition political groups are saying they do not want the Americans to do this, that this will further disruption in the country. So I think this is a very, very risky move not in the sense of whether or not it will work versus the Islamic State, wherever they might be, or Boko Haram, but the risk that it actually destabilizes Nigeria rather than deals with the violence which has been unsettling it.
All right. And also, final point, let's scale out for a minute, because also in recent days, we've had also the global implications of this, or let's say the connected thread here. If we look at Turkey, they've recently arrested apparently over 115 suspects, apparently IS linked, that were planning certain attacks. Now we have this strike on IS apparently in Nigeria. Is there some kind of thread here connected? Is there some kind of, let's say, wider strategy in all this, or is this too isolated? Just before we close.
No, there's no coordination here. The U.S. did not coordinate with Turkey and say, we've got to go after the Islamic State. And as I mentioned, the Nigerian attack has very little at this point to do with ISIS. Let's get back to the core. The Islamic State has cells in many countries. You could talk about cells that remain in Syria, even after the fall of the Assad regime. You can talk about cells that exist still in Central Asia, even after the Taliban has taken power in Kabul. And that is a threat to stability wherever ISIS is. But you do not divert from that with an attack on something that has little to do with the Islamic State if you want a sensible approach to it at the local level.
Mm-hmm. All right. So with that, we still will obviously get more of this. Let's see if, as you said, it's a demonstration strike or there will be more to come. We'll know in the days and weeks ahead. Look, always a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks for breaking that down for us this morning. Professor Scott Lucas there. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Sascha. Thank you, viewers.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.